Okay guys, welcome back. I've been asked by some of my students to do some After Effects tutorials, and since After Effects is now completely free to download at home, if you're one of our students, then I thought I'd do a quick basic orientation on how to use After Effects. So let's dive straight in. This is the After Effects window as it's open, but the first time you open it up, you're probably going to be presented with the option to create a new project. In After Effects, there's a difference between a project, which is something like this, and a composition, which is the particular set of images I'm working on here. What this means is I could create a new composition in New Composition, let's just call it Test, and I would still have access to all of the original materials that were in my main project. This is incredibly useful if you want to work between different compositions, different mini projects as part of some overall master project. However, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set it up from scratch. So, we're going to go to New Project. I'm quickly going to save my changes. And I'm offered the opportunity here to create a new composition or a new composition from footage. I'm going to create a new composition and then drag the footage into the area that I want. So there are several very important options that come up the second you click on New Composition. I'm just going to name this composition Tutorial and look down through the options here. So first of all, I've got to decide what quality I want it in. Generally speaking, everything should be at least 1080p these days, which is full HD. That's 1920 pixels across and 1080 pixels up across the screen. There are a whole bunch of other presets down here. You can go up to 4K or even 8K if you have the output for it, and you can scale it back down to DV, PAL, DV, NTSC if you want to work with those. I'm going to keep it at HD because it's good for uploading online. The second thing you're going to want to look at is the frame rate. The frame rate determines how many individual frames per second you're going to work with. Now in the UK, we generally work with 25 frames per second. However, in other countries, in the US for example, they often work with 30 frames per second or 29.97 frames per second sometimes. Cinematic film works at 24 frames per second, and you've got the higher frame rate options here if you're filming with a GoPro or slow motion camera, for example. The final thing you're going to want to decide is the duration of your composition. 30 seconds is a bit much for me. This is seconds and frames. I'm going to give myself perhaps 10 seconds. And you'll see as soon as I do, it creates 10 seconds worth of time on the timeline down here. So over here you have the project window. This is where you're going to drag all of your assets like video, image files, music that you might want to use in your composition. You also have the effect controls window. We'll get into that once we start putting some effects on. Over here we have the composition. Now there's only one view window as the default in After Effects. This makes it different from Premiere, and this can be used to preview things that are over here or to preview things that are down on your timeline. Over here we have a whole bunch of stuff, but most usefully is the effects and presets. Any special effects that we're going to drag on, and you can see I've got a few expanded here. Any effects that we're going to drag on, like glow, you can also search for just by clicking in the box, and this is often the fastest way to find an effect. Finally, down here we have the composition, including the timeline. As we drag various different assets down here to build our composition, they're going to appear on the timeline and we're going to be able to interact with them all individually. Okay, so let's bring in some footage and see what we can do with it. I'm just going to bring in this stuff I've been working with before. This is something I've already made in After Effects. This is just a quick Doctor Strange style blocking exercise I was working on for my visual effects students. So now I've got some video footage in here. There are two things I can do. I can drag this slider to reduce the scale of the size here, how many seconds are in, how many frames are in window. Alternatively, if I don't want to bring down the whole section, I can trim this bit here so that when I bring it down onto the timeline, for example like this, it only brings down the small amount of the clip. And you can see the ghost there that is the rest of the clip, and obviously I can expand that back out within it. But if I bring that down here to the basic start, I've just got this very short sequence. If I play, you can see it's just that. I'm going to give myself a little bit more footage in here to work with, but After Effects is quite versatile, so you can do your trimming on the timeline or you can do your trimming up here. I tend to do my trimming on the timeline at the moment because I'm just working with small video files. So let's say I wanted to create some text to go over this. I'm going to go to Layer, New, Text. In later tutorials, I'll get into how to use solids, cameras, null objects, lights, and all the rest of the different layers that you can use. But right now, I just want to create some basic text. You can see the text there on the screen. I'm just going to start typing something. And I've just realized I'm still in my crazy shield font that I've designed here. So this is a good opportunity to show you how to go over here and use the character window. So if I highlight all my text and just change my text down to something simple like Arial, and I'm just going to put Dr. OctoBeard in there as my text. Hit Command A and I can select all the text at once. I can change the size of the text. I can change the color of the text. So at the moment I have my text tool selected, which allows me to type my text. Now I'm happy with my text. I don't want my text there. I want my text somewhere else. So I'm going to switch back to my arrow tool and I'm going to move my text down here. Now what you'll notice is on my timeline in the composition window, it has created 10 seconds worth of text because that's how long I told it I wanted the composition to be. I don't actually want 10 seconds of text. I want the text to be on screen just about the same amount of time that the video is. So if I now scroll through, once we get past there, both the video and the text should disappear. Something else I'm going to put on for the purposes of this tutorial is some shapes. So I'm going to click on the square shape. Now I could go corner to corner like this. If I hold Shift, it will make it perfect. The reason that this is an empty square is because I was using this to draw my shield, is because the fill up here is completely empty. If I change that fill to have a red fill, it will fill it with red. I don't actually want anything in it, so you'll notice if I click on the color window, it doesn't do anything, it just gives me colors. I can't make it transparent again. But if I click on the word fill itself, one of the options up there is no fill. One of the options for the stroke, I can make the window thicker or smaller. I'm going to put it back to maybe 10. And then I'm going to shrink this down. I need the arrow tool to shrink it down. I'm going to go corner to corner, just like in Photoshop. And I'm going to move this over here like so. You'll notice that when I create the new layer, it creates a new layer on my timeline. And again, I'm just going to trim this back. I'm going to do it really rough for now. Doesn't matter too much. Let's say I wanted another square. I could draw another one, just as I've done here, but it would be much easier for me to just duplicate the existing one with Command D, which is exactly what I've done. Now what I've got is I've got one square directly on top of the other square. So what I'm going to show you now is some of the features that After Effects has that Premiere doesn't have as well, doesn't have as easily to access. If I click the drop down here, I can take a look at two things. I'm just going to look at the transform information. Transform information for just this layer. If I drill down into it, there's a whole bunch of stuff I can do, and in later tutorials I'll get into what all this means. So you'll notice that if I go to the rotation and I start rotating it, it's rotating around some kind of center point that's over here. That's no good. Put that back to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to center the center point on this object so that it rotates around the exact middle. All you have to do that is hold Command or Control on a PC and double click the pan behind option. You can now see the center point has come back in here, and if I start rotating it, it rotates around the center. I'm going to rotate it through exactly 45 degrees so it sits at this kind of fun angle like this. So when I was first learning to use After Effects, one of the things that lots of tutorials online referred to was this idea of pre-composing something. Nobody ever explained to me what pre-composing was. Pre-composing can be incredibly useful. Let's say I've got these three elements and I want them to move across the screen together. What I could do is I could go in and I could go to the transform and I could set a keyframe at position 1 here. I could go maybe 1 second in, check it's exactly 1 second, set another keyframe, and then just slide this object along. And if I remembered mathematically where it was, I could do the same thing with the other object and the other object. But this is really time consuming. So I'm going to take that position keyframe off. It would be really useful right now if I could treat this square and this text all as one layer. That's what pre-compose lets you do. So I'm going to shift select these three layers. So I've got them all selected. I'm going to go up to Layer, Pre-compose. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move all the attributes into the composition. I don't want to leave the attributes separately in this instance. And I'm going to call it Graphic. No, I'm not. I'm going to call it Name, because it's easier to remember. What it does is it effectively merges all these layers into one, a little bit like the Merge Layers option in Photoshop. Now if I drill down, I've got the same transform information here, but what I can do is I can set a keyframe at position 1. I can go 1 second in. I can set another keyframe with this tool here. And then if I've just moved this along a little bit, over the course of 1 second, it will move across the screen as one solid object. So we're nearing the end of this first After Effects basic orientation tutorial, and there's one final thing that I want to show you. Let's say we're finished. Let's say we've done everything we want to do and we're ready to export our final film. The one thing that you would never do is go File, Export, because that's not really how you turn this into a finished video. The easiest way to do this is to go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. And what that will do is it will add every layer in the composition down here into a render queue. Now you can queue up a whole bunch of different compositions at once before you render them. So rather than having to wait ages before you can go back in and work on another project, you can just queue up a whole bunch of things to render, and then when you're ready, you press Render. These will be rendered out to wherever you're storing your After Effects footage, which in my case is in my documents. And there we can see, there's the tutorial. Sometimes it comes in a pretty big file size. If you double click it, it will load in QuickTime and it converts it to a much, much smaller format that you can then save wherever you like if you don't want to work with huge files like this. I hope this has been a useful introduction and basic orientation to After Effects. Look out for more After Effects tutorials from OctoBeard Media. Thank you very much for watching.